We all have a moment where at the last possible second the hero arrives to save us all. Just when we thought we were Why has he activated that bomb? Yeah, we don't always get what we want with these heroes? We have done a list on this before, so make sure you check out our first video on this. But in the meantime, I am Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 more horror movie heroes who made everything worse. Number 10, Anna de Antony, Maniac, 1980. Regardless of whether you watch the 1980 original or the 2012 remake, Maniac is all kinds of messed up. Both versions follow Frank, a man suffering from childhood trauma who takes his pain out on the world by murdering women and removing their scalps. This is why therapy is important, people. As with most women-targeting serial killers, Frank ends up falling for one of his supposed victims. In this case, it's a photographer named Anna, played by Caroline Munro in the original and Nora Arnezeder in the remake. Anna spots Frank out and about and takes a picture of him, which leads to him developing an infatuation with her. Unfortunately, the poor woman is completely oblivious to his homicidal ways and ends up delivering victims to Frank on a plate. She introduces him to Rita, one of her colleagues, who Frank eventually ends up kidnapping and scalping. Nice one, Anna. Try explaining that one to HR. Even if you don't blame her for not knowing Frank's true nature, Anna was old enough to know not to invite strange men into her workplace, a mistake for which she paid heavily. Number 9, Paul, Cabin Fever. The feature film debut from modern horror powerhouse Eli Roth, Cabin Fever pits a group of teens against a deadly virus while they're on vacation in the middle of the woods. Why must teens constantly take trips to the middle of the woods? When will they learn? Heading up the gang is Paul, played by Ryder Strong, who has the coolest name in human history. The future voice of Brick Flag in Kim Possible might also be the so-called hero of this picture, but he ends up making one costly mistake that ends up biting everyone in the behind. When the group is confronted by a homeless man named Henry, the first person to contract the disease, Paul ends up setting him on fire, which causes him to run away. Had Paul been able to kill Henry, it would have saved a lot of trouble, as the drifter's infected body ends up in a local lake, causing the virus to spread via the water supply. Oh wait, there's more. Paul also gets infected later on, but instead of telling anyone, he tries to go to a hospital and ends up passing the disease on to a bunch of people along the way. What a stand-up guy. Number 8, Elise Renner, Insidious. Before it turned into a franchise and got completely out of hand, Insidious was a decent little ghost story directed by Saw bigwig James Wan. Starring Patrick Wilson as Josh Lambert, yet another man with a rocky childhood, the movie explores themes of intergenerational trauma as Josh inadvertently passes down his ability to project into the astral plane to his son Dalton. After Dalton falls into a coma following an interaction with a spirit, his mother Renee contacts a psychic named Elise Renner, played by Lynn Shay. It's Elise who discovers Dalton's ability and who suggests Josh reawaken his old powers to go after him, which turns out to be the worst possible choice anyone could have made. Whilst Josh is successful in saving his boy, he ends up possessed by an evil entity. This sets up the events of the second film, as Renee must work to bring Josh back to the light. Elise knew full well that Josh was susceptible to possession, having worked with him as a boy. So why on earth did she suggest this plan? The spirit inside Josh ends up murdering her, so at least she got her comeuppance. Number 7, Ash Williams, Army of Darkness. As if losing a hand and watching all his friends die wasn't bad enough, Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams ends Evil Dead 2 by getting flung backwards in time to the Middle Ages, with no apparent way to get back to his own time. Fingers crossed he didn't have any library books to return. But don't worry, Ash finds a way to make things right. All he has to do is track down the Necronomicon, utter a special incantation, and all will be saved. Sounds simple, right? Unfortunately, in his boneheaded wisdom, Ash forgets the last part of the spell. Whilst trying to mumble his way through it, he accidentally awakens even more undead creatures, including his own doppelganger, which then unite to form the titular Army of Darkness. It may have been a stressful situation, and it's not like he could have jotted it down on his phone, but parchment definitely existed at this point, as did ink. Couldn't Ash have just written the spell down? Or at the very least, made sure he knew the full thing before riding off to find the book? Patience truly is a virtue. Number 6, Rachel Keller, The Ring. After the runaway success of Hideo Nakata's Ringu, American director Gore Verbinski made his own version of the videotape-based chiller entitled The Ring. Verbinski cast Naomi Watts as Rachel Keller, the journalist investigating the killer VHS, who ends up in the firing line herself. Rachel learns of the nature of the tape after it plays a part in the death of her niece. Does she keep it locked away as a precaution? No, she decides to stick it on and pass the curse on to herself. Things get worse when she enlists the help of her ex-boyfriend, Noah, getting him to watch a copy of the video. Whilst this saves her own life, Noah is slain by the spirit. Last, but by no means least, Rachel and Noah's young son Aidan also watches the tape, because Rachel just left it lying around the apartment. Unleashing an evil ghost onto the world is one thing, but untidiness? That's unforgivable. Number 5. Louie Creed, Pet Cemetery. Here's a piece of advice for you. If someone tells you to stay out of a creepy-ass cemetery with magical powers, then for God's sake, stay out of the creepy-ass cemetery with magical powers. Otherwise, you'll end up like Louie Creed. Creed, played by Dale Midkiff in the first big-screen version of Stephen King's Pet Sematary, has things pretty good at the start of the movie. He's just moved to a beautiful little town with his wife Rachel and his 2 kids, Ellie and Gage, to take up a new job. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Gage could get hit by a truck, for starters. Stricken by the grief in the wake of his son's death, Louie buries Gage in the cemetery, which has the power to bring the deceased back to life. Plan works, but at a terrible cost, as Gage is now a violent murderer bent on killing everyone. The loss of a child is one of the worst things that anyone can experience, so Louie really can't be blamed for going to such desperate lengths to bring Gage back. Unfortunately, as this film's tagline suggests, sometimes dead is better. Number 4. David Drayton, The Mist. When a mysterious fog descends on a town in Maine, it brings with it a horde of vicious creatures who use the fog as cover to brutally massacre the townsfolk. A group of residents takes up shelter in a supermarket, including David Drayton and his son Billy. After eventually escaping the store, David drives Billy back to their home, only to discover that the creatures have killed his wife. Thinking that there is no way out of this living hell, David decides to end his own life, but not before shooting his son first out of mercy. And then comes the bleakness. Just as he's about to shoot himself, the army arrives. It turns out they've turned the tide against the creatures and have been able to rescue several survivors. Had he just waited a few more minutes, David would have been able to save his son. If that doesn't count as making things worse, then nothing does. Number 3. Mika, Paranormal Activity. When the first Paranormal Activity burst onto the scene in 2007, it was a revelation. It took the idea of a found footage movie and applied it to a domestic setting, telling the story of a couple trying to catch the evil spirits invading their home with a series of security cameras. The series, it runs out of steam fairly quickly, but for a brief moment it was the biggest property in the world. The couple in question are Katie, who actually works to stop the infestation, and Mika, who might be the worst person ever. Katie knows that the demons are real, as she's been haunted by them ever since she was a kid. You'd think that her partner would be sympathetic to her years-long trauma. You'd be wrong. Instead, Mika takes nothing seriously, making jokey comments, going against instructions given to him by a psychic, and even bringing a goddamn Ouija board into the house. Why would you do that? That's definitely going to make things worse. On the bright side, Mika finds out that the demons are real when they possess Katie and brutally murder her. All's well that ends well. Number 2. Jeff Saw 3. At least Mika's incompetence only got himself killed and Katie possessed, while Jeff from the third Saw film ended up accidentally killing 5 people. Jeff is still recovering from the death of his son by a drunk driver. His tests are all about forgiveness, as he has to save 3 people connected to his son's death in order to progress, which he doesn't. Though he tries his best, Jeff is unable to keep any of the trap victims alive, even killing one of them by accident after he'd already rescued them. Eventually, he reaches John Kramer, bedridden from his cancer, who presents him with one final chance to forgive him for this ordeal. Jeff refuses, hacking Kramer to bits with a power saw, but this sets off a collar around his wife's neck, killing her too. To top it all off, a tape made by Jigsaw prior to his death reveals that Jeff's daughter had also been kidnapped, and now he must go and rescue her. That is what is known in the business as a complete nightmare. Oh well, he tried his best? Number 1. Tommy Jarvis, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. There's been some pretty stupid stuff on this list so far, but at least nobody has managed to reanimate the corpse of a murderous monster, yet. At the end of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which is a hilariously misleading title, a young boy named Tommy Jarvis ends up killing Jason Voorhees, bringing his spree of violence to an end. Then, several years later, Tommy makes one of the most baffling decisions in cinema history. Haunted by visions of the hockey mask-wearing freak, Tommy goes to Jason's grave to make sure he's still dead. He does this by ramming a metal fence post through his body, just as a lightning strike hits the post and brings Jason back to life. If Tommy had just trusted himself a bit more and believed that Jason was still dead, then none of this would have happened. Jason wouldn't have been reborn, he wouldn't have killed more people, and audiences wouldn't have had to sit through Freddy vs. Jason.